Good evening, everyone, and welcome. What a great crowd we have here tonight. Thank you. Welcome to the University of Manitoba's Bannatyne campus, home of the Rady Faculty of Health Sciences. My name is John Kiersey. I'm Vice President, External Relations here at the University of Manitoba. And I am delighted to have so many people gathered here tonight for the grand finale of Visionary Conversations. We've been doing this now since early in Dr. David Bonnard's presidency, and it's been such a pleasure to have so many of our research community come out and talk about things that are important to our community. And now as we come to the end of Visionary Conversations, and we come to the end of Dr. David Bonnard's tenure, who will finish the end of June this year, it's been said to me by so many people in our community, our research community, our teachers, our students, and our general community, that this is a significant part of the legacy that Dr. Bonnard is leaving for us here at the University of Manitoba. Each Visionary Conversation has been a measure of this university's ongoing commitment to our community, to outreach, and to social relevance. Our first conversation began in September 2011 as a place for the university's leading minds to share their insight on issues affecting our world. They have evolved into valuable and insightful interactions between researchers, alumni, community builders, and thought leaders. A space of curiosity which we have created here at home and brought to other audiences in Canada and around the world. We had a visionary conversation in Hong Kong a couple of years back. We are humbled that you and so many others have followed us on this journey and will continue now to follow us on a journey of having visionary conversations, just in a different way. We are grateful to all the panelists who have participated in the visionary conversations since day one and shared their knowledge with us. Thank you to all of our panelists. Importantly, I want to recognize David Bonnard's role. His genuine interest and intentional leadership have created a collaborative and inclusive environment where different people, ideas, cultures, generations, and perspectives collide to create events that leave us all inspired to learn more and, more importantly, to do more. Thank you, David, for hosting conversations on climate change, gender equality, our aging population, managing our water resources, understanding reconciliation, issues around the LGBTQ community, and tonight on how we as a community can combat the impacts of drug addiction. His vision for this series has always been clear, and he has made them both engaging and accessible to everyone. It is an honor tonight to introduce our president and to present a visual rendition of Visionary Conversations and the journey at the conclusion of tonight's event. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our President Vice Chancellor, David Bonnard.
Thank you, John. It's certainly been my privilege to host Visionary Conversations, and I certainly deeply appreciate its success, which of course depends on you, our audience and panelists. Throughout this series, we've striven to confront challenges facing our community and to frame them in such a way that we might understand them and develop effective approaches to dealing with them. We're meeting here tonight on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. These lands are granted by treaties we respect. We recognize the mistakes that were made in the past, and the people were harmed, and we dedicate ourselves to reconciliation and collaboration. I'd like to acknowledge some special guests who are here with us this evening. Pleased to welcome some members of government, Ms. Malaya Marcelino, MLA for Notre Dame, the Honorable Dr. John Gerard, MLA for River Heights, Ms. Bernadette Smyth, MLA for Point Douglas. Thank you. Mr. Jeff Lieberman, Chair of the University of Manitoba's Board of Governors. Peter Wheatley, Chair of the University of Manitoba Alumni Association, and of course my colleague John Kiersey, Vice President External, who was just speaking to us. For our final visionary conversation, tonight, as John already mentioned, we consider something that, though it's national in scope, is very local in its impact. The ongoing and escalating drug crisis touches every aspect of our city and our province. It's large, it's unwieldy, it's complex, and it precludes immediate and all-encompassing solutions. It's multifaceted, and it requires collaborative approaches. Tonight, we'll explore this issue from several perspectives. Our conversation will take place in a number of parts, and with each news segment, I'll invite additional participants to share their insights. Our question is this: how can our community come together to combat the impacts of drug addiction? We've assembled distinguished experts from among our faculty, our alumni, and our community partners to help us understand this important topic. And of course, we'll look to you, members of the audience, to pose questions, make comments, and engage with our panelists. There will be a reception to follow, to which you're all invited. I'll just make one observation. If you've been to visionary conversations before, we've typically had an hour and a half that we spend together. We're planning to spend 2 hours tonight, so just so that you're aware of our intention. So let's begin. So to help us frame today's issue and its impact, I'd like to invite Dr. Tamara Taliu to the stage. Dr. Tammy Taliu is an instructor in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the Max Rady College of Medicine. She's involved with Overdose Awareness Manitoba, having been personally impacted by addiction herself. She's also a 4-time University of Manitoba alumna. Dr. Taliu, how has drug addiction impacted you and your family, leading to your involvement with Overdose Awareness Manitoba?
Well, first, is it working? Yes?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. Well, first off, I'd like to thank Dr. Bernard and the rest of the Visionary Conversations Committee for inviting me to be on this panel. I also want to thank Arlene Lass-Kolb from Overdose Awareness Manitoba. She actually not only helped my family survive an extremely difficult year, but I would not even be speaking here today had she not advocated for someone with lived experience on the panel. So that being said, I come from a family that struggles with addictions. One side, it's all gambling. The other side, it's all substance use. Personally, I struggled with addiction issues for most of my young life. Although alcohol was primarily my drug of choice, I used a lot of other drugs as well. As a matter of fact, when I was using, I cannot think of a single time in my life when I turned down any drug that was offered to me. In 1996, I decided I needed help. It was pretty much get help or die at that point. So I completed detox and the in-house treatment program at the Addictions Foundation of Manitoba. Although I managed to stay sober for about a year after that, I eventually relapsed and struggled for a few more years before becoming completely abstinent. I was very fortunate at that time. I had a lot of family support. I had immediate access to treatment, and I was using drugs before the onset of the opioid crisis and the current issues related to a tainted street drug supply that we're seeing today. This is my niece, Destiny. Destiny was truly an amazing individual. She was smart, compassionate, strong, determined. Destiny died of an accidental fentanyl overdose on November 4th, 2018, 6 days before her 23rd birthday. Destiny struggled with a number of mental health issues during her adolescence and began experimenting with drugs as well, including prescription pain medications. We didn't really know it at the time. She did see a lot of mental health professionals during this time, and she received a lot of support through the school system. Ultimately, she graduated from high school a year early in 2012 at the age of 16 and embarked on her university career. In fact, Destiny was posthumously awarded her Bachelor of Arts degree in October last year. Destiny rarely drank alcohol during high school, but when she turned 18, she started drinking and rapidly developed the problem. On her own, she went to her first AA meeting. She checked herself into the chemical withdrawal unit here at the Health Science Center and got herself into the in-house treatment program at the AFM. She was able to maintain her sobriety for about a year, and she really flourished in recovery. She was helpful, she was generous, and she dedicated a substantial amount of her time to helping others who were struggling. In recovery, she started dating someone who was also sober. His drug of choice was heroin. Eventually, they both relapsed, and he introduced her to heroin and intravenous drug use. That was early in 2016. My family was desperate for immediate help, but the wait times for the publicly funded treatment beds were incredibly long at the time. About 53 days for men and 206 days for women at the time of her death. So my sister borrowed actually $22,000 that was needed to send Destiny to a 30-day program in a private rehab facility. Again, Destiny was able to maintain her sobriety for a period of time, but as common with the disease of addiction, she relapsed again after about a year. That was really the beginning of the end. In the year before her death, there were multiple presentations at emergency departments and the Crisis Response Center. Each of these presentations offered an opportunity for non-judgmental, compassionate intervention. That was not often the case. I think healthcare providers often saw her as a nuisance rather than as someone in desperate need of help. In the weeks leading up to her death, Destiny wanted to get help. She completed detox at the Main Street Project from October 2nd to October 15th, 2018, and was accepted into an in-house treatment program at Tamarack Recovery Center. Her bed date was December 15th. She never made it to her bed date. People are dying in that gap between detox and longer-term treatment. Additionally, my niece didn't intentionally buy fentanyl that day, so I think her death was also related to the tainted drug supply. Destiny was one of the 4,460 Canadians to die of an opioid-related overdose in 2018. I just want everyone to think about that number for a bit. Like, that's 12 people a day, every single day of the year. This loss has devastated my entire family. It's devastating families here in Manitoba and all across Canada and North America. And I actually don't think we'll ever really recover. I am proud of Destiny and all that she accomplished during her short life. And I also have no doubt that she made and her story will continue to make the world a more caring and compassionate place. I miss her every day, and thank you.
Thank you for your openness and sharing that story with us. Our thoughts are certainly with you and your family. Now I want to invite Mitch Bourbonniere and Rick Lees to join us. Mitch is a founding member of the Bear Clan Patrol and a two-time alumnus of our Faculty of Social Work. And is a veteran community advocate, executive director of the Main Street Project, and a member of the Illicit Drug Task Force. Mitch, I know you work with law and healthcare professionals on a daily basis. What are you seeing in your experience with the Bear Clan on the streets?
Well, the two areas that I'm involved in, one is on the street, but I'm also involved with families and parents. So with the Mama Bear Clan, we walk 3 nights a week along Main Street and also into the North Point Douglas neighborhood. I also represent another organization, OPK, Ongomiizwin Kilamatwan, and the young people in our program also walk with the Mama Bear, as well as the Community Homelessness Assistance Team in downtown Winnipeg on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So we're boots to the ground. We're talking to people. We're establishing relationship with people. And my heart really goes out to our homeless brothers and sisters in Winnipeg here who struggle with trauma, mental illness, and addiction. And there's no easy answers. In terms of families and parents that I work with, I myself My firstborn son, who's 34 years old, has struggled with psychosis, with addiction. He's been homeless. He's been hospitalized over and over again. And so as a parent, my heart goes out to other parents. And I know there are family members in the crowd here who have lost their child, their loved one. And there are also parents, and I have friends in the audience, who are worried about losing their loved one, their child. And so my message actually is to listen to the mothers. They have the answers. We need to listen to our mothers out there. Thank you.
How do you see things from your perspective at the Main Street project, right?
Certainly we're seeing a significant increase in illicit drug use. At Main Street Project, we operate a 60-bed withdrawal management facility. That's at capacity generally. The principal drug that people are coming in for is meth these days, as one of many that are on the detox side. Probably about 2,000 men and women go through that facility a year, which is increasing. Our harm reduction supplies, which are clean needles, were about 500 a month 4 years ago, and last month they were 14,000. So we're definitely seeing a quantitative increase in drug use. From our lens, though, we don't really feel like the right conversation is happening. In my work in the illicit drug task force, we spent a lot of time talking about this topic, and it seems to me, and it seems to many of the members on that task force, that we're talking about a disease, but we're talking about it in terms of a behavior as opposed to a disease. And we wouldn't have this kind of conversation if we were talking about cancer, or if we were talking about diabetes. And so we're not applying the resources, or from our lens anyway. People with the greatest need have the least access to supports. And so from Main Street's lens, taking another program that we operate, our protective care facility, which we do in conjunction with the City of Winnipeg Police and Justice, 11,300 intakes a year to that facility. And it's cycling people through, because we're continuing in our community to have a conversation about behavior, and we're not talking about disease. And if we were talking about a disease, we would be listening to experts as opposed to politicians, frankly. And I don't think addiction is really a topic that can be resolved by any particular party. It doesn't follow party lines. It doesn't follow socioeconomic strata. It is a disease. So from our lens at Main Street Project, what we're continually struggling with is to try to help our leaders that fund healthcare, et cetera, to have the conversation about the disease that it is and the treatments that are required, and see them as treatments and not as moral judgment.
Can you say just a little bit more about the illicit drug task force? Are the recommendations coming from that being put into action?
Yes, I think there are a number of things that are coming out of that are good. I know that when that task force was formed, it was everyone was going, well, another task force, one of many. But when I looked back on it today in preparation for this session, a good example is the RAM clinics, which was a recommendation that we expand those. And I can tell you that we now have 8 dedicated RAM beds in our withdrawal management unit that are tied to those clinics. So those are really great steps, but we tend to be piecemealing things, and there were a number of things that were identified in the illicit drug task force. For example, there's a conversation in it about safe consumption and safer spaces, and it wasn't lost on the task force that we live in a province where those 14,000 needles that I mentioned are provided by the government and by the province, as they should, as a harm reduction approach. And Mitch and the Bear Clan were tirelessly out in the community to try to clean those up and so on when they find them on the streets. But we can't get the stretch across to safe consumption as a form of treatment. We want to talk about it as some kind of judgment on someone's behavior. So we're not following the science. So Australia is 10 years ahead of us. If we were to listen to research and academia, this would just be in the hands of experts like others that are going to follow me here. and we'd be treating it the way we're treating coronavirus. We'd be listening to the experts on the topic, and we wouldn't be swayed by moral conversation.
Thank you. Mitch, a lot of us have heard about Bear Clan Patrol. Could you say just a little bit more about the work that Mama Bear Clan does, more broadly speaking, and how you see the impact of that in the community?
Well, it's grassroots, and it's community-based, and it's inclusive, and I believe it's reconciliation in action. So on every Mama Bear Clan night, we gather at a women's center, at a North Point Douglas Women's Center. And we have local people from the neighborhood, but we also have people coming from outside the neighborhood to walk together, young and old, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, men and women. And there's a real feeling of community, and there's a real feeling of togetherness. And when we're out on the street, we get a lot of really good response. We've formed so many beautiful relationships with the people in the street, you know, and people driving by and honking and stopping and you know, supporting us. So it's very empowering.
Great, thank you. I want to ask others to come up for healthcare and addictions perspective. Dr. Erin Knight and Dr. Ginette Poulin will join us. Dr. Erin Knight's a lecturer in the University of Manitoba's Department of Psychiatry, medical director of the Addictions Unit at the Health Sciences Center, and family physician at the Aboriginal Health and Wellness Center, and a 3-time University of Manitoba graduate. Dr. Ginette Poulin is a family physician, registered dietitian, and medical director at the Addictions Foundation of Manitoba, and has graduated twice from this university, from our Faculty of Science. So, from your perspective, from each of you, is addiction more of a challenge today than it was 10 years ago? Were more people affected? If so, why is that happening?
Sure. 10 years is the amount of time I've been in practice, so there we go. What I would say is, initially when I started my studies of medicine, I recall perhaps within a lecture, 1 or 2 kind of sessions addressing a bit of addictions, but comparatively to things like cardiology, respirology, we had blocks of those of training. So when I started out, I went back up to my home community, which is Thompson, Manitoba, and I went away practicing. You know, like a good local girl, I did emerge, hospital, clinic, went to all the surrounding reserves and communities. And the one thing that I found that was the common thread through all of these is I was dealing with addictions, whether in the emergency department, whether in the clinic, whether in the hospital. So I went to pursue further studies so that way I could be better equipped. And what I think is interesting is that we're starting to talk more and more about this. It's always been there. 10 years ago was when I first started. Absolutely it was. But we're starting to have the palate to say, hey, we're having terrible outcomes, such as these fatalities and overdoses, which is unfortunately bringing it more to the limelight. But with that brings the opportunity for education and increasing awareness, as we're all here tonight. And so I think that is very impactful. And if I may just say, one other aspect about that for me, which stands out, is the stigma. And when I think of people who come in with heart disease or diabetes, we really don't have a lot of our opinions that hold stronger than the evidence. And so sometimes in the addictions world, that's what we see. And again, because often it's a very vulnerable time for people. We didn't have a lot of the historical time of research and evidence to back things up. And when it comes to the brain, it's one of the more complicated organs to understand. And so I think this is a time that we're all learning, and certainly treatment and approaches are evolving. And so for me, I'm seeing that within the last certainly 3 to 5 years, that is pushing much quicker.
I think one of the really interesting things in today's conversation around addiction is that we're seeing a really rapid evolution of the research and of the interventions that are being developed. And in all reality, addiction medicine wasn't even considered a specialty until a couple of years ago. In 2016, it became a recognized specialty in the United States and is only, as of 2019, a subspecialty of family medicine. And so we're in really early days in terms of some of the understanding of the disease process and establishing treatment of addiction as a regular part of healthcare. And so I'm glad that Rick brought up this idea of treating the disease. Is our understanding today of substance use disorder is it's a chronic disease. It's the same as treating diabetes or heart failure or any of the other things that I see in my family practice office every day. It's got complex biopsychosocial causes and complex biopsychosocial treatments. And what we need to do is have these conversations and do better at teaching the people who are coming up through healthcare to be able to recognize it as a chronic disease, to intervene early, and to treat it every day.
So how large a problem is this for the healthcare system? I mean, is it possible to quantify that in any way from your perspective? You've both been kind of on the front lines.
I think it's underestimated. I think what we see is the tip of the iceberg. We know that stigma affects the ability for people to present, whether it's self-stigma, structural stigma, institutional stigma, or societal. And certainly with that, also our system doesn't recognize it to the degree that it should. And what I mean by that is when people present to the emergency department or into the hospital, maybe they present with pancreatitis. So diagnosis will be deemed as a pancreatitis that causes an alcohol use disorder. That might not be captured just because of how our system is. So again, I think many things impact that. And really, we know people don't access the care, and then when it's there, are they getting the right one, and is it identified? And these are the things that I think are core to why we're not seeing that, and certainly stigma is layered kind of in all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of how big of an issue is this? If we look at some of the evidence from, in terms of morbidity and mortality worldwide, substance use disorders are amongst the top 3 causes of morbidity and mortality, particularly alcohol use. And so I know we're talking about drug use today, but I think we need to also frame it just in substance use in general. It's the same disease, it's the same pathways. And while I'm happy that we're having these conversations. Substance use has always been a problem. It's just that we're talking about it more today. We're also just seeing, as Ginette kind of alluded to, the pattern of use has brought it to the forefront because we're seeing people dying of overdose over and over and over again. And we're seeing people who are having escalated behaviors because of our current crystal meth use. And that's bringing it really to the forefront. But that's just today's pattern of substance use. We might see that change again in the future.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's actually really important because we tend to be chasing the drug, and in my time I've seen, there was a meth peak, and then it was opioids, and now it's back to meth, and there's alcohol that's consistently there, and then there's benzodiazepines that we don't talk about, right? There are many levels to this, and even using the language of substance use disorder, this is our DSM-5 criteria, and yet, we still don't have a consistency in how we approach people, say addictions, abuse, dependence, and it means different things for different people, and so even clarifying and understanding the layers within that, I think, are really important, and so that recognition of it as that disease, and a disease that is compounded by multiple layers, which I'm sure we're going to hear very shortly, particularly social impacts, meaning, safe housing, supports, family units, trauma. I know this is, there was an important study that came out, the ACE study, which is the adverse childhood events, and what that indicated was people who have experienced in their childhood either a form of physical, emotional, sexual abuse or neglect, or that a family member had experienced time away through incarceration, or a child witnessing their father abusing their mother. These lend to factors which increase the risk of chronic disease, which is explicitly things like mental health, addictions, heart disease, and whatnot. And so I think that's really informative about not only using the evidence for the treatment that we have, but upstream addressing those really important issues that help to prevent us so that we're not always chasing the patterns as we move forward.
Thank you.
Well, and to Erin's point, we're learning quickly. The knowledge is accelerating. 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about intergenerational trauma and understanding that that's real and that exists. And today we're talking about that. The other reality, though, is we're still looking at addiction as a model that there's an end in sight. So in other words, I'm going to treat you and you're going to get better and we're done with you. Instead of understanding that this is a chronic illness, that recovery is a lifetime journey, and we have to invest in that lifetime. So we're looking for short-term solutions to a long-term problem. If you're dealing with addiction, you're dealing with it for the rest of your life.
Just don't go to a 28-day and then you're fixed or cured. That's a fallacy, right?
And that's not how it works. And to be honest with you, we're also not learning from other pandemics and epidemics. We spent, it is now almost 35 years of the AIDS epidemic. And in the first 10 years of that epidemic, we talked about moral judgment on homosexuality and men who have sex with men. We talked about drug use and how you get HIV. In the United States, they talked about building camps where we would put people that had HIV. And it was only after 10 years and a whole generation of people dying that people who were living with HIV said enough. We need to be involved in this discussion, and we need to move it to what it is, a virus, a disease. And then in the next 20 years, we were able to develop over 37 different retroviral treatments that now it's a chronic illness. But we had to move the conversation away from talking about how you get HIV and talk about the disease. We're doing the same thing with drugs today. We're continuing to talk about how people behave or how they come to using drugs, instead of talking about it as you have a health issue and we need to treat that issue. And as long as we keep confusing the public and we keep having these back and forth conversations about, is it a behavior, is it a choice, and say it's not a choice and nobody ever chose to use drugs to a point of addiction, the same as no one ever chose to deliberately get HIV. Until we move that conversation in the public and stop confusing the public, until we do that, we will not invest in what these folks know as clinicians as to what the right thing is to do.
Thank you. Friends, I'm going to add a couple of others into the... add a couple of other folks into the conversation to discuss factors from a law enforcement and socioeconomic framework. Please welcome Dr. Kathleen Buddle and Chief Danny Smyth. Dr. Kathleen Buddle is a professor of anthropology in the Faculty of Arts, specializing in applied and media anthropology, with research that includes Indigenous media activism in Canada, as well as gangs, poverty, and crime. And Danny Smyth is the chief of the Winnipeg Police Service, a law enforcement officer for 32 years, and two-time UM Dr. Buddle, what's the connection between drug addiction and gangs in Winnipeg?
Problematic drug use, I hope you'll forgive me, I have a head cold, so I've prepared some notes. Problematic drug use is spread throughout Winnipeg communities, but the harms associated with it are very disproportionately distributed. The academic community-based organization partnerships with which I am involved tend to approach problematic substance use not as a sign of some personal deficiency or criminal or antisocial defiance deserving of punishment, nor as a pathology that can be cured with individualized treat and release solutions. Instead, problem substance use is viewed as developing at the intersection of a person's social position, cultural history, lived experience, coping and support resources, and their patterns of use. As such, attention is focused on the unequal distribution of the rights of citizenship, on untreated trauma, gendered vulnerability, unstable housing, on the failure of mental health supports, and on obstructed cultural integration, among other factors. How we understand the problem is important because it informs how we respond to it. Framing the situation as a drug problem or meth or gang crisis is concerning for those who see problematic substance use as merely a symptom of a much larger social crisis rooted in our community-wide failure to address the basic needs of people who are burdened with the harmful effects of marginalization. People who experience socioeconomic marginalization not only experience high rates of problem substance use and mental health issues, but also more severe harms associated with drug use. According to Statistics Canada General Social Survey on Victimization, problematic drug use is the factor with the greatest impact on the risk of violent victimization, increasing one's chances of experiencing violence victimization 400%. Cultural identity alone is not statistically significant as a predictor of victimization when it combines, however, with experiencing child maltreatment, perceiving social disorder in one's neighborhood, homelessness, drug use, and poor mental health. It becomes more strongly associated with it. Our research shows that children who experience violence are twice as likely to be victimized or to perpetuate violence as adults, whether this is violence against others or forms of self-harm, such as drug abuse or substance misuse. When structural violence, on the other hand, systematically prevents youth from meeting their basic needs, it subverts democracy and causes the type of desperation and anger that may erupt in physical violence. Both forms of violence deplete community resources and atrophy the repertoire of imagined possible futures of its community, of a community's constituents. Across Canada, Indigenous youth account for 46% of admissions to correctional institutions, while comprising only 8% of the youth population. Manitoba's youth incarceration rate continues to be the highest in the country. Manitoba also possesses the highest per capita rate of children in care. 1 infant per day is taken into care in Manitoba. Family distress is a direct and lingering effect of the centuries of colonial policies which have and continue to disrupt the sovereignty of Indigenous families and is often implicated in problematic substance use. Similarly, the literature on newcomer and refugee social exclusion, integration challenges, poverty, strongly suggests that such groups experience profound forms of precariousness, which current mental health programming fails to ameliorate. Newly arriving refugees in Canadian cities experience social exclusion and multiple forms of disadvantage. Multiple systemic barriers impede the learning and acculturation process of newcomer residents and contribute to financial hardship, low-paid jobs, a lack of affordable housing, a lack of social and community networks, problematic substance use, and criminal involvement. Nor are the risk and protective factors for harmful use of substances equally distributed among youth. Specific groups who are at higher risk than their peers include homeless or street-involved youth, youth in custody, youth living with co-occurring mental health problems, youth with a history of trauma, as well as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth. LGBTQ2 youth are nearly twice as likely to mix opioids and meth in an intensive manner and to engage in consistent and long-term usage. Indigenous, newcomer, refugee, LGBTQ2 disabled youth, and others display unique patterns and consequences of substance use and require the consideration of diverse cultural, environmental, and historical factors in planning and implementing of effective intervention strategies. Quickly, to get to gangs, Indigenous and newcomer youth gangs incorporate the very individuals who may be socially isolated and in status transition. Gangs provide a viable means for negotiating a range of new territories and processes, and because they rely on sets of emotional and symbolic ties to internally order their members, they may be especially alluring to those who are without any connections, money, work prospects, or position. Gangs seem to hail those who yearn for an answer to the demands of place. The evidence shows that while street gangs may initially have begun as an alternative informal economy, however, they have been reduced to becoming the unwitting agents of an internal colonialism, targeting Indigenous and newcomer youth, exploiting women and girls, in short, doing the dirty work of larger, often overtly racist criminal organizations. More and more young women are being shipped or transported to Winnipeg, where they are forced to work the streets in order to pay off drug debts they incurred on reserve. Dealers may typically allow the debts to build in northern communities, then demand repayment in full. Young women must migrate to cities to pay off their debts, but are only able to make partial payments while supporting their substance dependencies, which results in a form of sex slavery. Within cities, women and girls may become involved in the illegal activities that are the preserve of gangs, because the responsibility of childcare with the burdens of economic marginality and domestic violence lead some women to choose economic crimes or drug dealing as alternatives to hunger and homelessness. Manitoba gangs sustain themselves primarily through the traffic of illegal drugs. They thrive as well on the avails of sex work, extortion, money lending, theft, illegal gambling, and insurance fraud. And as leading proponents of an anarcho-capitalism, street gangs in Manitoba are actively distributing a whole array of pharmaceuticals, including opioids, crack, coke, crystal meth, and cannabis-based products. The three largest gangs have developed bases in rural Manitoba in order to distribute gangs throughout the province and throughout First Nations communities. In addition to preying on the intense poverty and despair of many Northern Reserve youth, Winnipeg gangs are known to follow the money. Oil, mining, and industrial construction projects such as hydro are important markets in the narco economy. There is, moreover, a growing problem with substance use among gang members and their affiliates. As the members become users, they accrue debts that must be reconciled with increased sales, hence the expansion of gangs into more rural and reserve areas. The general pattern was that the majority of young men involved in gangs would age out of both gang life and hard drug use by their mid-30s. Mortality rates are changing, however, and many are simply not living long enough to mature out. Since 2004, I've been partnering with Indigenous-led community-based organizations and newcomer-led community-based organizations, and with a number of other inner-city organizations in collaborative, community-based, ethnographic, evaluative, participatory action and other research projects and service delivery projects. We provided the Circle of Courage project for 5 years, which was a gang outreach project, and are currently in the 5th and final year of the Wakotowin Strengthening Families program. Do I have time to explain them, or should I wait?
Yeah, maybe we should move on and we'll come back. Yeah. Chief, can you give us a sense of what the issues are on the ground for your members?
Well, what she said, kind of. Certainly we see the gangs, primarily they're distributing, but they're being exploited as well. I mean, organized crime, the higher levels of organized crime, it's a supply-demand thing. And right now the supply is so rich and so cheap that it's just catching so many people up into the addictions realm. On the other side of it, with meth the way it's emerged in the last few years, it's really changed the dynamic for our frontline members. And I include firefighters and emergency workers in that as well, because we're getting called often to deal with people that are frankly in crisis. And I know we're not necessarily wanting to talk about the behavior, but it's often the behavior that is the reason people are summoning us to attend these calls for service. We've been monitoring just in the past year over 2,800 calls for service where people were calling us to help them deal with somebody that was in crisis. And usually that crisis was erratic or aggressive behavior that people either didn't know how to or weren't equipped to deal with. So they were phoning frontline services to try to do that. The result of that, though, is we're seeing injuries, both to our members, but even to the people, family members and the addicted members themselves. It's a really, really volatile situation now, and I don't think a shift goes by where our members aren't dealing with some kind of drug-associated thing. And right now, meth is kind of overshadowing, and I don't want to mitigate that because opioids is a very real problem. Different results. People are essentially dying. Meth is a little different, but it overshadows things because of that erratic behavior.
Can you say a little bit about the impact that policing is having? And how do you everyone is describing a huge problem here. How would you see the impact that policing is having on these issues?
Well, I think frontline services in general, whether that be fire, paramedic, police, it's taking an awful lot of our time to deal with that. Anyone that's heard me speak about this, I talk of this as a health crisis, not a law enforcement crisis, not a policing thing. But we have a component in it because often when we get called to these calls, people have been involved in some kind of criminal behavior that we can't just walk away from. So there has to be an accounting that way. This past week we had the year anniversary of Jamie Adowo, the young man that was killed not far from here during an alleged home invasion and his homicide. Again, meth had a very real component of that, and it's not something that we can just, it turned into a real serious criminal behavior. And even for those situations where we can stabilize it without necessarily involving the criminal justice program, there's just not a lot of off-ramping available to us to help people get the care or treatment that they need. So huge gaps for us, and we end up having care and custody of people for much longer than we ever intended because there just is no one available for us to turn over to.
Thank you for that answer. I'd like to bring the last two panelists up, Dr. Bob Christmas and Melanie MacKinnon. Melanie MacKinnon is Executive Director of Ongomiizwin Health Services and Head of Indigenous, the Indigenous Institute of Health and Healing at the University of Manitoba, and is also the Senior Health Advisor to the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and a University of Manitoba nursing alumna. And Dr. Bob Christmas is a long-serving law enforcement professional and author of a number of Canadian justice-related works. Dr. Christmas received his master's and his PhD from the University of Manitoba. So, Bob, you've written about responsibility, the importance of public discourse around social issues. Where does responsibility lie for addressing social issues like drug addiction and the aspects of it we've been hearing about already?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me here. I'm glad to have an opportunity to contribute to this important conversation. It always warms my heart to participate in these sharing circles and partners in the community. I've had the opportunity over my last 30 years in policing to participate a lot in collaborative efforts around various social issues, and I see a lot of parallels. I decided to dive in for my doctoral research to sex trafficking and sexual exploitation in Manitoba. And just listening to everybody speak here, the systemic barriers to collaboration and where the responsibility lies for these issues, I find so many parallels, and parallels reflecting back on my career as well when I was involved myself in working on issues like the arson crisis we had back in 2000, gang violence at various points in my career. So I see so many parallels, but I'd like to just focus on, I think, stigma, which Dr. Poulin and others have mentioned, I think is so key, and how it prevents, I think, a lot of people from seeking the help they need. In my research, talking with sex industry survivors, labeling and avoiding stigma stopped many of them from seeking the help they need. I think the growing discourse and public awareness across society, altogether across society, growing awareness around, for instance, sex industry, slavery, the fact that these people don't choose that life and they don't choose to be preyed upon and put into a life of slavery is so important, because in the past, it wasn't that long ago that we looked at them as criminals and, you know, choosing that life. We now know that they don't choose that life. Like, no 13-year-old girl gets up in the morning and looks in the bathroom mirror and says, you know, I was going to be a school teacher, but I think instead I'm going to be a prostitute. It just doesn't happen. And people don't do that with gang violence either, as Chief Smyth has mentioned. And I think the same stigma probably stops a lot of people from seeking the help that they need around drug addiction. If I had more time, I'd like to talk more about also systemic barriers. You know, people expect too much from the police, and they expect too much from the healthcare system, and too much from, you know, all of our various mandated agencies working in isolation. And there are a lot of gaps that can be closed, but I think we're heading in the right direction. We need to shift the responsibility for these social issues right into the center, where even the voting public feel that it's their issue. In my research on the sex industry, I found that a lot of people feel that it's not an issue that they should be involved in, just like Indigenous, you know, reconciliation. A lot of people feel it's government's issue, or someone else's to deal with. Well, it's not. It affects all of us, and it's a lot closer to home than a lot of people realize until they actually get involved in it. So that's another important aspect around the social discourse, which I think is so important. And I'll just close bearing the time in mind. I'm thinking to an example of where they've saw great success in a similar kind of scenario in Boston in the early 90s. A couple of emergency room doctors got tired of seeing African American males coming in shot or badly injured on a regular basis, and they reframed the issue as a health issue, the issue of gang violence. And really, they started a movement that raised social awareness in the whole community, making it everybody's responsibility to try and do something about that problem. And almost miraculously, within a few short years, they got to a point where they had 3 or 4 years with almost no incidents of gun violence. Whereas previously they had people coming in either badly injured or killed on a monthly basis for years. So I think it's a great example, and we're heading largely in that direction. I just want to reiterate that I've had a great privilege in my policing career of working with a great many people who have great intentions from all the different corners of society. The mandated agencies, the NGOs that are working on these social issues. A lot of people with good hearts, but there's a lot of things that we can do to fix the system and how those people work together. There's a lot of gaps, as the first speaker mentioned, that we need to close. But the intention is there. We just need to find a way to bring all those resources together and be more efficient with the whole rather than the parts.
Thank you. Melanie, how do you see these issues that we've been talking about from the perspective of your responsibilities in Ongomiizwin?
So I thank you for having me, and thank you, Tamara, for your courage in sharing your and your niece's story. All that was shared with our colleagues resonates with me. It's a truth that we all deal with and face every day. I would like to offer some perspectives, certainly from an Indigenous perspective, but not just that. As we know, addiction is not discriminatory to class and income and culture. Unfortunately, our culture is heavy hit by such addictions and mental health issues, and there's reasons for that. And thank you to Ginette for outlining some of those particular areas around ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. She named a few of them, but if I could just say that in that study that was done in the States almost 30 years ago, at least 25 years ago now, we're finally talking about that here. It's taken 2 decades plus for us to have this conversation around what that means and what that looks like, because we're actually seeing the effect and the outcome of that study from 20 years ago. We're seeing what those adverse childhood experiences look like in early adulthood. That's what we're seeing today. And I can tell you right now, it's gonna get a heck of a lot worse. So when Rick says this is a long-term problem, when we have 90% of our children in care today, do you know what we're gonna be facing in the next 10, 20, 50 years? And there's a reason for that. So these adverse childhood experiences can range as Ginette explained, it could range from a childhood experienced abuse, from sexual, emotional, verbal, physical. You witnessed a family member be abused. There's domestic violence in the house. There is a father or a parent has been removed for incarceration, or you are part of the CFS system. The list goes on and on and on. The trauma is immense. In that study, it suggests that 60% of American adults had one of those 10. So 60% of you in this room have experienced one adverse childhood experience. 25% of us in this room experienced at least 3. Our risk of mental health and addiction is 10 times more. 4 experiences or higher. So if I was sexually abused, if I watched my mother be beaten, if I was removed and taken into CFS, and if I was bullied at school, it doesn't have to just be in your house either. These are external forces, including racism and including systemic racism. It's very, very likely I'm going to have significant mental health issues, and I'm probably going to come forward with some kind of addiction, because what addiction is, and I like this definition from Dr. Daniel Cermak out of the University of Tennessee, it's ritualized, compulsive, comfort-seeking behavior, because we have broken these children's connections with their family, with their mothers, with their siblings. We have broken all attachment, and we're doing that at birth. Well, we were actually doing that at birth up until a couple of weeks ago with birth alerts. We were taking newborns from their mothers. This is the systemic issue that we're dealing with, and I wish I could say that there's a community response that is here and available tomorrow. I mean, Mitch is doing his work, which needs to be done, because another factor is inclusivity. So all of those adverse experiences do have an opposite, and that's where the solutions lie. It's the inclusivity, it's the relationship, it's the meeting our clients where they're at, it's the non-judgment, it's the non-shaming, it's the community response to our families in need. And from a macro perspective, it is absolutely about the most important one, which is freedom. Individual and collective. We have to recognize and honor First Nation and Indigenous rights. Absolutely front and center, should be a priority for every Manitoban if we want this problem to go away.
It's almost overwhelming to listen to all of you talk about from your own experience and from your areas of expertise what's in front of us. So what can we do as a community to make our community a healthier and safer place? There's a lot of expert knowledge here and a lot of expert intervention. Those things are clearly needed. But I wonder what you could tell us about how those can be balanced with or amplified by a more engaged public. So what can we do as a community to, in addition to the things that you're doing, and I guess I place this in the context of hearing you all say there's a lot of good work going on and a lot of people really caring about a situation that, for many reasons, some of them already kind of wired in, is going to continue to be stressful. So what would your advice be? Would it put you on the spot if I kind of start down the line and let each person give an answer to that? Or
What would my advice be to kind of address the current problem? Ironically, I think that's way outside of what we could do now, but preventing these adverse childhood experiences, that is my research wheelhouse actually. That would go providing supports to parents to foster that parent-child stronger parent-child relationships. That would do wonders for addressing some of substance abuse and other risky kinds of behaviors. Today, though, I would like to see, I find struggling again, mostly with my niece more recently, but it's really a disjointed system out there, particularly for people who are struggling with comorbid mental health and addiction issues. Some places won't take you if you're using drugs, so you can't get your mental health help. But if you don't get the mental health help, you're never, ever probably going to address the substance use issues. So that would be one thing, more integrated care. And also I think it's key, it's reducing that stigma. It's reducing that stigma. Even in my own world, I often say, I have no problem saying I'm an alcoholic for some reason, but I have a real problem saying I used drugs. And that's stigma, that's internal stigma. And I think even, despite the fact I've been in recovery for almost 2 decades now, you do a lot of things you're ashamed of, a lot of things you regret. And I think people do care. I still carry some of that with me today, without a doubt. So I think that's key, is reducing the stigma, talking about it, because until you get people to care, nothing's going to change. And that's just my opinions.
Thank you for your openness.
Well, I really liked Melanie's presentation, and the piece that really struck out for me is how we respond to people in general, whether it's the person themselves with the addiction, whether it's the parents, the families, the extended families. We have to lead with kindness, we have to lead with love, we have to do everything based on relationship. So I'm a big believer in mentorship and wraparound and navigators. I think we need navigators. It's hard to be systemically literate. I have trouble with systems, never mind, as a professional, never mind folks that don't have that training to deal with. Also, I think there's so many different angles of this issue, right? So, in your story, there was a gap. So there was someone who was ready. She was ready. She was courageous. She went into detox. She graduated from detox, but then there was that gap. So that's an angle. But another angle is, what about our kids, our adult kids, who are refusing treatment? So in our province, if you're under 18, if you're a parent and your child is under 18, you can go to the law courts and you can make a case to have them detained, right, at YASU, the Youth Addiction Stabilization Unit. Once they turn 18, you can't do that as a parent, right? So with my son eventually was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So under the Mental Health Act, he can be detained. So Danny, you talk about people in a fluid state of psychosis. Why can't they be detained? Right? They need help, and they're in a deteriorating state, and they're not really able to make decisions for themselves in that moment. Why are we not detaining them? and helping them. We do it for the kids, we don't do it for the adults.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm sounding like a broken record, and I'm going back to a common theme. But if the question is, what can we do as a society? This is a good start, but we have to have the hard conversation, and we have to land on an understanding. And as long as our communities are divided, as long as when we have elections, addiction becomes a platform, that somehow a liberal platform is better than a conservative platform is better than an NDP platform, as long as that's where this conversation lives, we will continue to divide and be unsuccessful in bringing together all of the resources we need to deal with it. So we have to have the hard conversation. And as I say, just like 30 years ago, when society had to get its head around a virus called HIV, we need to get our head around addiction. We need to understand that it is in the DSM as a mental health issue. We need to understand that at Main Street Project, I can tell you that many of our programs are deemed to be housing, but what our staff are dealing with is mental health and addiction. And that's the work they're doing, but they're being paid to provide transitional housing. So that's a disconnect right there. When we talk about, actually we should talk about behavior, and Chief Smyth is absolutely right, but the trouble is that's at the end of the illness. So we're working from the wrong end backwards. By the time Chief Smyth and his folks get involved, the illness is out of control because we haven't put in place the protections ahead of that. There are 9,000 to 10,000 kids in care in this province, and at 17, they're packing their bags and they're on their own without any social supports. And many of them find their way to us. So if you're talking about what society has to do, this, to be honest with you, this doesn't belong to politicians. It doesn't belong to any particular government. It does belong to all of us. But in this room, I can guarantee you that if we all sat down and tried to identify what we agree on, we probably wouldn't agree. There are probably people in this room that believe that somebody who found their way to addiction did so just because they made a choice. And that's okay. It's okay to have that idea, but they need to talk to me because I need to change your mind. Because until we actually, as a society, understand that this is our problem. It's an unintended consequence, by the way, of a wealthy society. It's an unintended consequence of fast communication. It's amazing to me the speed at which we can communicate today, and yet the isolation it has created. And in that isolation allows people's trauma to come forward. And so, as you said, seeking self-medication for trauma that, by the way, many people don't even know they have, finds their way to chronic addiction. And then the last piece, what we have to get our head around, is to understand that recovery is a winding road and not a straight path. And all of our systems are set up today for a straight path. Our entire healthcare system is set up so that you come in, you're diagnosed with an illness, we get you better, and you go out or you die. There are two ways out of the hospital. You're better or you die. And that's the same application we're providing to addiction. And in fact, it's a life journey. So how do we build the system? Up until 2 years ago at Main Street Project, if you'd asked even ourselves and our own staff, we would have said that withdrawal management is withdrawal management, and then we're going to get you to treatment. Today, our attitude is treatment is day one of withdrawal management. So the minute you get there, you're in treatment. But we've had to completely rethink our model of detoxification as opposed to just housing and clinically reducing a dependence to how do we begin to deal with trauma as day one.
I'm going to take the opportunity to build on what a couple of other people have said here so that we can keep moving this discussion, because everybody's input here has been absolutely wonderful. The first thing that I want to build on is Tammy's comment just about the gaps in the system. And I think one of the things that was a comment from one of my mentors as I was training that I really took to heart is that The reality is we don't have a system. We have a whole bunch of silos of individual treatments and individual programs that are trying to support people, and there is no system. There are some of us who are within this pseudo-system that are trying to identify pathways and are trying to make these silos into a system, but that's the biggest problem that I see on my day-to-day basis working with people who are trying to navigate this, because I have the exact same problem. I am a healthcare professional, I am highly educated, and it's difficult for me to navigate the system. And I know everybody who runs all of the programs. So how does that make sense? We need to look at this with a long-term perspective and actually build ourselves a system so that there is a route where it's clear where people can access route into care and routes through care. And it is it's a winding road through care. So I think that's the big one for me, is that we do need to look at our system or our lack of system and build one. The second thing that I think that I want to build on what Rick said was that if I look out into the crowd here, in Canada, what we know is that at least 1 in 5 people in Canada in their lifetime will have a substance use disorder. And that is excluding nicotine use disorder, so not talking about smoking. And so if every one of you in the crowd thinks about some people close to you, I'm betting you that you have somebody who has struggled with substance use. And that crosses all boundaries in terms of cultural background, in terms of economic and socioeconomic background. And one of the things that I think that we need to challenge ourselves as communities is that sometimes the people who have the least amount of supports around them, because they've had a history of significant trauma and intergenerational trauma and systemic racism, they are the most impacted sometimes by the substance use, because some of the people that you think about when you think about those people who are close to you who have struggled with substance use have had some insulation because they've had robust social structures that can pick them up and that can help them to navigate these non-systems that we have. And so I think if we as a population can recognize how impactful substance use is to all of the people around us and prioritize it and tell the people who make the decisions about where the funding goes that we need to build a system, then maybe we can make some way forward.
Thank you.
So I think everyone's very passionate, as you can see, about this topic, and we probably can talk forever and ever. I know I can. When you said nudges, I thought, oh boy. But I do want to comment and build on a couple things, and importantly, kind of what Bob was talking about. When I think of each of us and our responsibility, and typically what I had seen when I'd first come into healthcare was it's somehow go get fixed over there, and somehow it's people over there that have this problem. And I think we really need to sit and take this moment where we've been seeing these substantial impacts and take that moment to pause and think within ourselves and challenge ourselves about what are our thoughts and opinions around this, and take that time to learn, to educate, to open up a conversation with the person next to you. You never know. This is something where people are often suffering in silence, and that isolation and silence is disheartening and can be disruptive to someone's whole life. And so, you might sit there and think it has to be the healthcare providers or the law enforcement, or any of these parts to do this. The reality is it's each and every one of us that is part of this solution. Yes, we've been parts of this problem, but we're also part of that solution. And until we sit there and we go, it might be that conversation that I have with a family member today, or that hug that I give to the colleague, that can help break down those barriers and allow opportunities to open up. And then again, whether it's education, advocacy, we can all advocate as alluding to, politicians, and a lot of our healthcare system, that was part of a big shocker for me in my first year of practice when I started medicine. We're naive, we're gonna change the world, but this world that we have is only ours as part of the larger picture. And so we need to all take that responsibility and do what we can. And so advocating for parts of the system, even within medicine, we don't have addiction tariffs like we have for heart disease. Someone comes in and they have a cold, we have systems to respond to that. Someone comes into the emergency department, they have a heart attack. We all know what our role is as part of that. So we need to learn and do that as part of the addiction sector to make that happen. I also just want to say that if you do work in the field at this point in time, and you have, over these past 10 years, I really want to recognize the people that do this work day in and day out, not only on the panel, but also out in the crowd. And I know there's certainly some attendees that work at the Addictions Foundation in Manitoba, and I really think we need to commend, because it is a challenge and it's very hard for people who are in the field that are overburdened, overstretched, and until we have the resources and supports for the caregivers too, just like we need the family members of those suffering from addictions, this affects us all. And so I really want to acknowledge all of those that play a part and encourage us to do that. So,
Thank you. Thanks. Danny?
Well, I want to preface my remark first by saying, for many of the people that on the panel I've been working with for years, and we've been talking about this for years, literally. The government has been slow to respond to this, and Rick was pretty charitable with his comments there, with the task force. But it has been a slow response to what I think was alluded here as the tip of the iceberg, and we're not kidding around that. There are all kinds of indication of the power that the addictions is having in our community. Having said that, there is some tremendous community-led work that's going on that I think if people want to get involved, it is there if they want to get involved. Some of them are here today. Mitch is representing Bear Clan today, and there's sort of two, Mama Bear Clan, but I mean the Bear Clan in general is a community-led group that does a tremendous service just in picking up the discarded needles that are left in our community. They've expanded, their service to provide food distribution in the community. Some of the things they do are, when I get new recruits coming on, I almost want to have them walk with the Bear Clan so they really learn what it's like to walk the beat and get to know the community. So they do some tremendous work. Mitch talked really briefly about OPK, but I mean, that's another service that's kind of connected to this. He's helped so many young men and women find a path out of the gangs, the gang life, and find a more productive way to give back to their community. It's important work. It's helping them divert from that sort of criminal behavior and that misleading sense of belonging that they're having with the gangs. Main Street Project, if you haven't been down there lately, it's like a campus now. Food bank, transitional housing, shelter, treatment. The only thing limiting them is resources, frankly. But again, lots of volunteer work, all of these. Bear Clan takes volunteers. Main Street Project takes volunteers. One that's not here today, Morgberg House. I really like the model that they have for helping people with a longer-term recovery with transitional housing. Again, grassroots organizations that do tremendous work. If you can't volunteer, almost all of them have charitable status. If you don't have the time, you can give them money to help them carry on. So there is a lot of good work going on in the community at the grassroots level, and I've only just touched on a few of them.
Thank you.
So I also work with community-based organizations, and I firmly believe that academic and community-based partnerships are an important avenue into addictions, both research and service provision. One of the difficulties, however, is that the community-based organizations have been increasingly placed in a position of having to provide for the basic needs of their clients. So the clawing back of government resources has resulted in these community-based organizations having to provide food, clothing, childcare, and so on for clients who are in often extreme forms of distress. And they do not have, and in addition to providing these basic needs, they also have to fund themselves. So it's a continuous process of fundraising, an increasingly burdensome process of accounting for whatever government funds they do receive, and a lot of burnout because it's really around-the-clock crisis work in the community. So I feel as though there really should be a proper apportioning of resources. Some people say that the police get too much. I don't have a problem with how much the police get. I would just, I don't. More for the police, but also more for community-based organizations, because people have this misconception that, you know, policing isn't important. But when it comes to gangs, definitely, the gang members are more likely to target culturally close members of their own communities and their own families, as well as themselves, rather than, you know, people who are far removed from them. So without policing, it's really like a train that's off the rails. So I feel like we really need to place more resources into the hands of the first responders who are working in community-based organizations. And community-based organizations are also a place that have found a way to remove some of the barriers to participation. They are often geographically appropriately located. So for instance, gang members don't have to travel into hostile territory to access services. They have built up connections and trust in the community, so people are willing to go into community-based organizations where they might not come into hospitals for service because of past experiences or perceptions about the way they may be treated. So also, what these partnerships allow for is a sharing of information. What academics can provide is the evidence base, ensuring, searching around for the types of models that are working elsewhere, ensuring that the programs are data-driven, not politically driven, and what the community-based organizations have to offer is the commitment to a continuity of care. They don't close their doors at 5. They are responding to calls at 3 in the morning all the time, and people are using their services in a way that are not that the hospitals, the police, the universities, the education services are not able to provide. So I'm a firm proponent of community-based organizations. They are almost always looking for funding. If you're looking for, some of them have charitable status, some of them don't, but please feel free to volunteer and make donations. It's an important investment.
Thank you. Bob?
So two tangible things I can offer. I think we need to be more client-centered, and we need coaches. Client-centered, an example, when I was working and the work I've done with sex industry survivors, they're all intersectionally challenged, various levels of substance abuse issues layered on top of trauma. You can't help work with trauma. Oops. Am I back? You can't work with trauma until you deal with the severe substance abuse problem. So a lot of these people need a lot of resources. Why do we ask them to come to EI appointments, bank appointments, counseling during the day, 9 to 5, when all the action's at night, they tell me. When they want to come in for help, that help needs to be available. And that's just on a daily basis, but when they come and need serious resources, they can't be told, well, it'll be available in 2 months.
Thank you.
So we need to be more centered around what the needs are of these people and build things around that. And further on that, we need coaching to put all these resources and help us to work better together. We've got, like I said before, a lot of good-hearted people working in community-based organizations and in the mandated agencies, policing, healthcare. They're all well-intentioned, but we have serious gaps in the system. We need coaches to oversee all of this. Somebody mentioned earlier that we've got we're on the edge of a potential pandemic. All of a sudden, we've got millions and billions of dollars put into coordinating our response to that. When are we going to coordinate our response to serious social issues like the drug issue? Like Chief Smyth mentioned, there's ample evidence that this is upon us, and we're all engaged in it, and we need to all take responsibility and get involved. So we need somebody coaching these systems and helping them to work better together. Government perhaps could only fund agencies or make it a serious consideration of the agencies that they fund based on how well they play together and fit into the whole system.
Thank you. Melanie.
So once again, I agree with all of my colleagues. Maybe I'll just take a little bit of a turn and talk about the academic community and what our responsibility could or should be. And it's in essence things like this conversation around leading collaboration, leading in having that uncomfortable and that crucial dialogue around racism, around addiction, around all of those things in the mirror that we don't always want to look at, but they're a part of our everyday society and our everyday fabric. And so some of the work that the university's been doing to date around anti-racism is central to this work, because our clients go into structurally racist centers. We have to lead this work and not just as academics, but as learners and as families of learners, to start changing that discourse. And then we need to also be teaching our learners about trauma-informed care, around intergenerational trauma, around the history of the colonial history of this country, and its effects. And for many, that's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a conversation that has started, and I'm really proud that we are part of that academic community that's doing that, and we need to continue to challenge that discourse in our way of thinking, and continue to support as we train the whole health workforce, that hopefully we have a much more prepared one in the next half a decade. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists, and now to invite members of the audience to join in the conversation. There are 3 microphones that are available, I think possibly one upstairs, although I can't really see into those lights, for those on the second level. But if you could raise your hand, one of our folks will, one of our team members will walk a microphone to you, and please be brief so we can have a number of folks contribute.
I wanted to thank first all of the panelists for this great conversation. I wanted to thank Dr. Barnard for bringing us this great series over the last few years. I've seen such tremendous changes within the university, and particularly I think through this increasing engagement around discussions around our social responsibility. So first, a couple of provocative questions. Why can India set up drop-in centers for women in sex work that provides services for counseling, for healthcare, for creches for their children, thousands of them, and Canada doesn't? Why is Pakistan ahead of Canada in terms of its approach to harm reduction for people who inject drugs? These are really profound questions. That's a wider issue. But I wonder, what can the University of Manitoba do for our community going forward to address difficult issues like addiction, societal issues? What would it look like if the University of Manitoba took it as their responsibility to say, we're going to take on this challenge and we're going to measure our success against progress in this challenge. Because we have the resources. We have all of the people who can think about this. We have a huge responsibility over the healthcare system. So my question would be, how would it change how we work as a community if we went beyond the conversation and said, we want to take the responsibility to address violence, or we want to take the responsibility to address addictions with measurable expectations and measure our progress annually, what's happening and what is the University of Manitoba. I think it would change the way we teach, it would change the way we do research, it would change the opportunities for our students. So my question is, how could we take on this kind of a challenge as a university going beyond the conversation?
Great question. And for those who don't know, this is one of our outstanding researchers and contributors to this conversation himself, James Blanchard. Who would like to reply?
Well, I can give you some hard examples of some things that are actually happening here. And actually, I'll make two comments. One, you're already doing something, but you've exported it. So you have an alumnus named Dr. Andrew Bond, who is involved in inner city health in Toronto. And Andrew is a staunch advocate for addiction as a specialty within homelessness. And he has been back to Manitoba to talk to the leaders here to say, you need to begin at an academic level to understand and treat this as a specialty that you would train people in universities, that they would graduate in specialized medicine around this topic. Unfortunately, you've exported him because he's doing it in Toronto, not here. But he is talking to us about it. The other thing that I think universities can do, and it's happening now with perhaps a competitive agency, but Red River Community College and Main Street Project have a culinary arts program for people who are living with addiction and mental health. And we will be graduating this year our first cohort of 8 students. These are students who would never be able to get into that program in Red River, but through partnership where the classroom is at Main Street Project and there's an entire replicated lab there, these students will have a future. Because the other reality around addiction is, particularly if you're dealing with meth, our model today, again, is about trying to put you back together the way you were. And that's a very old model. And the reality with addiction today is what you were is gone. So we have to be able to create new realities for people and allow them to do that themselves. And so the Red River program with us is helping people build a new reality. Many of them have lost family, they have restraining orders, they can't go back to family because of behaviors that Chief Smyth is dealing with, but they need to find a road to recovery, a pathway of hope. And so in that instance, that is all covered through that program. That's only 8 people, but it's a start. So one of the things universities could do is find a way for people who are in recovery to get into this university so that they can find a pathway to education and learning and a new career, for example.
Rick.
The University of Manitoba did something absolutely wonderful, and it's the best kept secret around, but they developed courses for inner city high school students in leadership for First Nation, Indigenous, and newcomer students at CETA at Merchants Corner on Selkirk Avenue. And I've been blessed to be an instructor in that program, and we are developing the future leaders from the lived experience youth. And University of Manitoba did that this year.
Ginette?
I was just going to add too, certainly from the health perspective, both Erin and I are involved in a lot of teaching from medical students, pharmacy students, nursing students, obviously even physicians who are fully in practice. And so whether it's, informal or formalized electives, rotations, we're also in the process of looking at building an addictions medicine fellowship program here, so those things are happening. But also I think it's interesting because, and I heard you bring up violence in that, but I think we also need to look at how we manage those who are attending the University of Manitoba for their addictions and for the violence that they are experiencing. We know that happens, whether it's gender violence or LGBTQ, two-spirited, and that's happening right in our own home. And so those are things, people are suffering from addictions in silence. So again, we have, even today I was presenting prior at the Faculty of Law, and so again, I think people are asking and reaching out, and I think we need to bridge some of these things, and we need to build, and I think those things are starting here at the University of Manitoba, and some of them are a little bit more advanced and some not, and so I think we need to push through that, but again, looking within our own home, how we do things are important too.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Hi, first of all, can you hear me? I want to thank everybody for showing up. What everybody is doing, because I have a degree, well, I haven't completed it, but my training was here in Winnipeg. My family were in medicine and law, and I lived in LA and New York. We are a little bit behind, but we're getting there. When you pull all that together, the homelessness, the violence, the virtual experience, the academic, you pull it together, you get a productive person. They're not backwards, they're moving forward, and they contribute to society. So first of all, I happen to know Thompson, I know the area. And thank goodness, Dr. Barnett, first of all, you need money, and you gotta bug the government. To run any university, you need that money. Now, Rick, I happen to know your predecessor, John Rogers and Clay. So that's what I mean. You just don't leave. And also, I sat on 17 boards, even with the Winnipeg Harvest or the Sally Ann. You give a hand up, not a hand down. That person, again, I know Red River and how they're all integrated with U of M. That person then becomes a very happy, healthy, not homeless, and they become, again, a productive member of society. So at society, I'd like to say thank you, society, for listening to me.
Thank you for your contribution. Others over here?
Hi, good evening. Sorry. Thank you for the presentation and the knowledge you gave. I have two questions actually, and please forgive me, I had another appointment. I might have missed this if you went over it statistically. The first question is, it's kind of like a question. Is socioeconomic status a barrier to getting help as well? In the terms of not lower but higher. I mean in the richer areas with those populations, because it's something they might hide just in their homes as well. And I feel like there's this huge misconception, someone commented on it, that it's just people in the core, or just a certain race or of people that struggle with addictions or mental health issues that like spiral into addictions. So if any of you know about that, can you, I guess, inform us, or maybe just inform me if I missed it, because that misconception leads to stigma as well. Because I personally know someone in my life that would be in that category I'm talking about. And the other question is, a few years ago, CBC produced a documentary called Hold Your Fire. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was based basically on nonviolent policing without guns, and basically what Canada does compared to somewhere else in Europe. And my point is, one of the things they discussed in Europe is that, I forget the location, but the police don't go out with weapons. And they were saying 40% of people that get shot in Canada are dealing with a mental health crisis. And they said they incorporated policing with mental health workers as part of their system. So when they go out on the calls, the mental health workers or the professionals have the capacity to deal with somebody in a mental health crisis situation. And I understand the police force isn't equipped for that, and that's like a crux of the problem. So again, with what you're saying, integrating the system. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you so much.
I can speak to the first one. I don't know if Danny will speak to the second one. I tell him we sit on panels often together, and usually a lot of questions are directed to the police department. But I don't think we have an accurate statistic to certainly demonstrate, not only and this did come up a little bit, but in terms of numbers because of the stigma that's there. And so you're absolutely right. There are many people in very affluent homes with perhaps no experiences, particularly around socioeconomic deprivation, that are experiencing addictions. We know the overdose data here in Manitoba does demonstrate that many are overdosing in their homes and in areas that are affluent as well. And so we are seeing that. One thing I can say from the anecdotal perspective, in our RAM clinics, which are the Rapid Access to Addiction Medicine clinics, one of the things that struck me initially were there were many well-to-do professionals coming in. I have lawyers, I have nurses, I have social workers that, guess what, are working in our very own system, struggling with addictions and presenting with the need and feeling that shame and barrier about, you know, I'm part of the system and here I am requiring the assistance. And so I think, and when I said that we need to look at things differently and what can we do, when you have that friend, I think reaching out, offering, even being that emotional support. Can I come and walk with you? I know that people coming into our clinics, when they have someone with them, it's quite intimidating to come enter into this system. And so you can be part of that with them and certainly encourage them to come access that. And if people are worried about things and want to start in a more perhaps less invasive way, our Manitoba Addiction Help.ca, which is the AFM website, lists all pretty much, I can't guarantee 100% of the resources in Manitoba, but quite a few of where they're located, what they offer. There's a questionnaire people can fill out, which will help to direct based on how they answer what kind of services they might need, and then certainly entering into that. So I think that's an important angle to look at as well.
Danny?
Well, in terms of armed police, I mean, in Canada, most police services have been armed for decades and decades, and I don't see that changing. But I should put it into context for you. You know, of all the encounters that we have with the public, less than half a percentage point really ends in any kind of use of force encounter at all. And I mean use of force holistically there, not just lethal force. So the percentage is pretty small in Canada, and particularly here in our community. That being said, when it does happen, it becomes very newsworthy, and we all hear a lot about it. So in terms of us partnering, there's a couple things that go on. We do spend an awful lot of time training on de-escalation now. We've always approached use of force as the least amount of force required to contain or control the situation. There are some instances where our TAC units have been partnering with paramedics when they go into the field. And I certainly would be open to exploring what those kind of partnerships might look like. They're more complicated than it sounds. A good idea, more complicated only because we're talking about different organizations, different labor unions, a whole myriad of things that would need to be kind of considered. But I think there's merit in having these multi-skilled units in the field, so that you might have a law enforcement officer with somebody that's a medical trained official or a social worker, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Okay, over here. This, please.
Hi, my name is Harold Bowie. I'm a family physician. I worked in Winkler, Manitoba for nearly 40 years, and I do anesthesia and general practice. I do not have any expertise in addictions, but fortunately 3.5 years ago I married Jocelyn Fair, who had worked in an addictions clinic in Perth, Australia for about a year and a half prior to us getting married. And shortly after we got married in our travels, we visited Dr. George O'Neill, who is running a clinic in Perth, Australia called Fresh Start. I would be rather gloomy hearing what's all been said by the panel today, but when we visited George O'Neill and saw what he was doing in Perth, I was frankly blown away, because they are doing some amazing things that don't just help people that are struggling with addictions, but are actually getting people out of addictions. They have a multimodal approach that includes a sustained released naltrexone implant, which allows people to be craving free for up to 6 months at a time, and allows them to get their job back, get their family back, get their housing back, and leads to long-term remission. I'm not saying cure, but long-term remission. And just a couple facts from some of the peer-reviewed journals that have looked at their work. I've got to put my glasses on here. When they looked at mortality rates for people with opiate abuse 4 months after implants compared to people on oral naltrexone mortality rates 26.2, implants 7.3. They're not curing everybody, but those are dramatic reductions in mortality. When they looked at abstinent rates for amphetamine use at 4 months, 66% abstinence. At 6 months, 48% abstinence. So these are significant results. And it wasn't just me that was blown away. I'll just read a paragraph from a letter from Dr. Fergus Law, who's an addictions specialist in England. As you know, myself and another consultant addiction specialist decided to visit your clinic as we had heard and seen sufficient evidence to suggest that you were using techniques that were ahead of the rest of the world. And if so, then we would wish to learn about them and, if possible, bring them back to the UK. Our assessment is that these are indeed world-beating techniques and that we would definitely like to introduce them to our procedures in the UK. In addition, I would also like to congratulate you on the impressive range of post-detox support and recovery options that you have developed. My wife could tell you many stories about the patients that she worked with, and I myself met, we were only there for a day to meet Dr. O'Neill and visit his clinic, but what stands out to me were a couple of the patients that I spoke with, one of whom was a man in his mid-30s who was about 7 or 8 days post-implant, and he said, "My life has changed." This was only 1 week after his implant, and Jocelyn could tell you many other stories. So I'm not so much asking a question as posing a challenge to the university. Naltrexone implants are not approved for, Dr. O'Neill has actually invented a sustained release implant, and it does not have general approval for licensing. It can only be obtained for research, but my challenge would be to the University of Manitoba to look into this and see if what this GP from rural Manitoba is saying has any possible merit to it, and if it does, start a trial using a multimodal approach, which you are already doing, but that would also include naltrexone implants. And let's put Manitoba on the map as, you know, starting a program like this and finding out that this really, really can work and could be saving thousands, if not maybe millions of lives. Thank you very much.
So thanks for that challenge. So there's been a hand up over here for a while. I'll take one more question and then we're going to come to the end of our question period. I think the microphone is on its way.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. So my name is Bryce, and I'm a harm reduction nurse that works at Winnipeg's largest needle supply distribution service. And one of the things that I like to keep a part of my practice is focusing on the root harms of substance use. And one of the root harms of substance use, I believe, is the prohibition of substances. Dr. Tamara Tamalu, you talked about how people who use drugs are experiencing harms due to this toxic drug supply that the illicit market created. And Dr. Kathleen Buttle, you also talked about how a lot of the gangs are funded because of this illicit drug marketplace that we currently have. And everyone's been talking about how we've been treating substance use disorder as a medical and disease problem. So why are we still operating in this prohibition model? Prohibition has shown time and time again to increase harm and stigma towards people who use substances. The prohibition of beer has led people to create hard liquor back in the day. And now we're seeing a similar thing with the crackdown of opiate pharmaceuticals that's leading towards fentanyl and other toxic analogs flooding the market. So why are we not controlling the supply chain and legalizing substances to reduce the harms of this toxic drug supply?
Quick answer.
Hello? Is this on? Yeah, I have to agree. Although it seems counterintuitive, many individuals who are engaging in substance use, it is what is actually keeping them alive. People are engaging in survival use in the same way that they're engaging in survival sex, and there's moral outrage against it. But it is often what gets a person from day one to day two. So it does, again, seem counterintuitive, but in many instances, harm reduction is the best way to go. I don't think that, however, that there is a one-size-fits-all solution to the issue. There are cultural communities for whom harm reduction is simply not appropriate. So sun dancers, for instance, are abstainers. There are many Muslim families who are abstainers, and harm reduction is not something that will work in those instances. So I come from a family, a multiracial family. Two of my Cree sisters have fetal alcohol effects, and for them, harm reduction is not an option. They are functioning at a level that allows them to be preyed upon by gangs and predatory members in the community. So for them, abstinence is something that is necessary. But I agree with you that we need to go on a case-by-case basis and examine for whom harm reduction will work, and other instances where it won't.
The first and the last word to Tammy.
All right, I just wanted to. Is this still on? Okay, yeah. Sorry. I wanted to say, I think part of the problem, like in my own history, like abstinence is drilled so much in your head. Like it was the only way when I sobered up, and I didn't want to tell people I smoked pot because blah, 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 blah. And that's not the way anymore. Like I 100% believe in harm reduction as part of the continuum of care, including the decriminalization of substances for personal use, for people who aren't ready maybe to get help, but also at the very least for the people who are trying to get help. Like you have to be able to help them stay alive. And yeah, I agree, so that's all I'm gonna say. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you in the audience for coming tonight, and I certainly want to thank the panelists. a wide variety of experiences and backgrounds, and really appreciate the willingness to be open about the both the positive and the negative aspects and the limitations on what we know and have tried to do and what we've accomplished. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege for me to have hosted these discussions for almost a decade, and I want to thank the audience as well for coming tonight, and many people who are here have been regular attenders. Thank you to all of you who've been participants. As usual, we have a reception right afterwards, and there will be a video of this event that will be posted. I appreciate the challenges that have been given to us tonight. I suspect if each of us spoke about close friends and family, we would each have stories to tell that hurt us deeply. It would be difficult for us to tell those stories. I appreciate the openness of folks who've told stories up here tonight, but they relate to stories that all of us could tell. And so this is something of significance. This is what we had hoped that the visionary conversations could be, that we would talk about things that matter, and that we could make changes in behavior and in our lives and make for a better place, which is the overall goal of university. So as a final thanks to everyone who participated this evening and in all of our visionary conversations, we're going to play a short retrospective video, and I would say thank you. Merci, miigwech. Let's watch the video. We're done. Thanks. These conversations have explored what I believe are among the most vital issues impacting our lives on global, national, and personal levels.
Being a global citizen, in my mind, is actually a way of thinking. It's a way of living. It's not so much something that you do necessarily, but it's something that you are. It's seeing yourself as part of a greater whole and part of the problems, but also part of the solutions.
We have to cut down the waste, and we have to improve the access to food, but we don't need to produce more food at all. Whenever I say it, all the agricultural and plant science people are at me, but this is a simple fact. We waste too much, and we should do things smarter than we are doing.
Climate change doesn't care. The climate change is not about the planet. I say this every time I talk to the public. It's about people. It has nothing to do with the planet at all. The planet will just carry on and do its own thing as it's always done it. We'll just won't be able to maintain a civilization that is necessary for what we need to do if it fails.
What happens when religious rights of one group conflict with the equality rights of another group? So, for example, you raised the issue of same-sex marriage. And my answer to that would be that my ability to marry in no way infringes on your right to religious freedom.
There's a lot of debate at the international level about what is a pandemic. As far as I'm concerned, if it's in 4 or 5 countries, it's a pandemic. It doesn't matter to me how severe it is. It's a pandemic.
Calls to action are a fantastic framework. But how do you change people's lives? I think we need to empower our own youth. I think we need to empower ourselves as Indigenous people.